your response to reports of Americans?
Hold on. Slow down, everybody. I want to talk about two things. First, Afghanistan.
Wow. That every time I watch videos of generals, Biden, Kamala Harris after Afghanistan, it just makes my blood pressure go through the roof. They were all so just kind of flippant and uncaring about the whole freaking thing. Joining me now, Brad Miller, retired Colonel, U.S. Army. Kate Monroe, retired United States Marine Corps. That's what I'm talking about. Semper Fi. All right, Brad, let's begin with you. It wasn't funny. It was aggravating beyond belief to watch them put our people in harm's way, watch our young men and women die, and then watch what we did in response to that. And what blew me away was not necessarily the dirtball politicians, but the generals. Where are the resignations? Where are the people resigning in disgrace? Where are they?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the key word here is accountability, in that there has been none. So I think you raise a great question, is that how can Americans, whether they are service members, whether they are veterans, whether they're the family of service members or veterans, or whether just Americans in general, how can Americans look at our generals and our admirals and actually think that these individuals are making the best decisions for our military and for our national interests?
Apparently, I don't know what happens once you get a star put on your shoulders anymore. Kate, you know what I remember? I talked about this at the beginning of the show. As a very young, very average Marine, accountability was everything for us. If you didn't have enough socks in your pack, you were held accountable for it. If one of your guys didn't have his toothbrush in order, you were held accountable for it. That's what it's like for the men and women on the ground. But apparently, once you get promoted above 06, that just goes away now?
Yeah, I mean, apparently you can be in American politics and be all the way up in the White House and have no accountability. It's not just Afghanistan. Look at the border. Look at homelessness. Look what has happened to veterans on account of all these migrants. Look at the assassination. No one wants to take any accountability, period. And it's an epidemic that we have in our leadership here in our country.
No doubt. I remember when John Kirby, Brad, remember when John Kirby got up, he said this after we drone strike 6 children?
What I can tell you is we looked at this thing very, very comprehensively. And again, we acknowledged that there were procedural breakdowns. Processes were not executed the way they should have been. But it doesn't necessarily indicate that that an individual or individuals have to be held to account for that. But look,
is there discipline inside the Pentagon at all? I mean, maybe there are no charges brought up, but is anyone demoted or disciplined for what happened that day?
What we are going to do, there's not going to be individual discipline as a result of this, Willie. But what we are going to do is learn from this, and we're going to enact and improve our procedures and our processes to try to make sure this doesn't happen again.
We're going to learn from this, like a child eating paste in preschool. What does that mean exactly, Brad? A failure of process, but nobody's getting fired or reprimanded. Who is process? Can we meet him?
Yeah, so here's what that means. That is a euphemism for we are going to do nothing, but we are going to tell you that we are going to do something to improve our processes. I mean, this is just extremely wishy-washy language. As he said, there will be no personal discipline. And here's the thing. Accountability can look a lot of different ways depending on the offense that has been committed. So, of course, there can be charges that are filed, but there are other ways in which discipline can be achieved that don't necessarily result in criminal charges. The problem is when, nothing is done. So I think at the outset you mentioned that I was a retired colonel. I actually resigned as a lieutenant colonel, but I spent 19 years in the Army, and before that, 4 years at West Point. And just like you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, accountability was everything. I mean, that was something that I learned very early on in my first days as a cadet at West Point. But somewhere along the way, as an institution, we have completely abandoned the necessity or the practice of accountability.
I can't believe they ruined West Point, too. What a freaking revered place. What was it like at West Point? Was it cool? I could never have gotten in or been an officer at all because I'm not smart enough, but was it cool being there?
I'll tell you this, and I don't know how I got in. There's probably some other Brad Miller out there, and they accidentally, sent me the acceptance letter that was meant for him. But I will tell you this. So I was in my junior year at West Point when 9/11 occurred. And so as great as the institution was before 9/11, that place changed instantly from from one day to the next at 9/11, because even though it was a revered institution, don't get me wrong, but on 9/11, everything that we were doing became so much more real, right? And everyone knew. I mean, by 9/12, we all knew that we were going to graduate and we were all going to go to war. And of course, that happened. You know, I graduated in 2003. All my classmates, myself, I mean, we all went to war. It was just what was going to happen at that time period. And so what happens now when we look back 20 years later and we look at where our military has been over the last 2 decades, and we just have to ask ourselves, what has happened to our institution, and why are the individuals who are at the top of the institution allowing it to just go down the drain, or perhaps driving it down the drain deliberately?